drank pots and pots and pots and pots of strong black coffee, trying to keep my sleepy soul awake. But the sleepiness still comes along, and when it does, it's fast and strong. I end up with a bad case of the shakes.
Hey yo, it's Guido coming at you with another episode of Coffee Talk. Thanks for tuning in. I very much appreciate your support of the channel. You know, lately I've been thinking about Tier 10 and Endgame content, especially as it relates to World of Tanks. And there's always been something about Tier 10 that I couldn't put my finger on. I never liked it that much. And we're going to discuss that a little bit. We're going to roll into, after talking about Tier 10, we're going to talk about ranked battles, which is apropos. This is the endgame content right now in a beta season that World of Tanks is attempting, or Wargaming is attempting to make for World of Tanks. So we'll discuss endgame content a little bit, and then we're going to get into an interview by Milos Jarabek, I'm sure I'm massacring his name, and he touches on some of this endgame content as well. And at the end of it, I'm going to give you my opinion on what endgame content should be in World of Tanks. So let's get started. Coffee Talk, grab your coffee. Have a drink. Nice fruit motif on my cup right here. Let's get to it. Okay, Tier 10. Tier 10. That is what we all work towards, right? So we grind, we grind. There's a very long grind in this game, and we're attempting to get to Tier 10 because that's where the cool tanks are. Meanwhile, I would submit that there's tons of cool tanks behind Tier 10, Tier 9, Tier 8, Tier 7, all the way down to the bottom, actually. So I want to like Tier 10, I really do, and I have all the Tier 10s, but if you look at the number of battles I have, they're concentrated at the Tier 8, 7, 6 area, bleeding in a little bit to Tier 9. And every time I finish a grind and I get all the tanks, I always tell myself, you know, I should really dig into Tier 10 because that's supposed to be the end game, right? That's where all the really cool fun in the game is supposed to be. And I'll get the Tier 10s out and I'll start playing, and then it just leaves me with nothing. I don't like it, Tier 10, and I never really could put my finger on it until recently, as I started to think about it with ranked battles and some of the other things that are going on in the game. And I said, you know, Guido, I want to like Tier 10. Why don't you like Tier 10? And what it's come down to for me is it's just so homogenous. All right, everything basically has great accuracy, hits hard, is fast. It's basically just a bunch of the same tanks. The mediums can outspot the lights, so they're basically the same two kinds of classes. Now when I say homogeneous, there are some of the outliers, but that actually is part of the problem as well. When you're talking about massive alpha TDs out there, or crazy autoloaders, it just becomes kind of a homogeneous mess, and it's not that interesting. It simply just is not that interesting. And because it's homogeneous, it becomes kind of a brutal grind at the top. Even though you're not really grinding anything, it's a very grindy feel when you're playing them. And to me, it's an issue of balance. And I'm not talking balance as in one tank balanced to the other. I'm talking about the balance of the fun. The balance, not just tank to tank, but the enjoyment balance. Because all the tanks, or most of the tanks, are very similar, it just doesn't seem like there's any uniqueness. Now there are some, again, outliers along the way, but in general at Tier 10 it's actually kind of boring. The only thing that it has going for it, really, because the tanks are so homogeneous, is the skill of the players. And that's definitely an issue because there is a lot more skilled gameplay up at Tier 10. But for me, that does not counterbalance the homogeneous nature of all the tanks at Tier 10. So I always find myself dropping back down to 8, 9, 7, 6, where the tanks are actually unique and interesting. And even though the skill level isn't as high, I enjoy those levels much more. Now you could say, oh, well, Guido, you're not very good at Tier 10 as compared to the rest of them. And that, yeah, absolutely. My stats are much better at Tier 8 than at Tier 10. I can hold my own at Tier 10, but I'm just not enticed to go there because I just, to be quite honest, find that tier incredibly boring. Which brings us then down to the end game comments, or the end game idea. There seems to be this idea from Wargaming that Tier 10 is end game, or when we get to the end game content, air quotes, that it has to be Tier 10. Well, I don't know why that's even a thing. That's an interesting argument to me, which is going to bring us up to the next subject, which will be ranked battles. Now stick with me because I'm going to bring these all together at the end. But let's talk about ranked battles and a little bit about the end game as we move on. Alright, so ranked battles. I just discussed that endgame content is kind of something that Wargaming is seeking. Alright, their vision quest. We'll get into why they're even attempting that later on. But ranked battles currently, the beta season is in swing. And that is their attempt to make tier 10 endgame content. Their belief is that the best players go to tier 10. So you grind to tier 10, you try to be the best player, and you want to fight at tier 10 to prove that you're the best player. That's kind of the cart before the horse to some extent for me. But let's back up to the ranked battles themselves. I haven't played them because for one problem that I have with it is it's a 3-hour window in the evening, a point at which I can't play in general. So I don't have time to do that at that time. Obviously I play a bunch with this game, but it's going to be weekends, mornings on my day off, and sometimes early or slightly late to afternoon. But the evening is more or less out, which is why I don't do clan wars and other things. That's a personal problem. All right, I'm not saying ranked battles are terrible because of that, but it is a bit of an issue for me. What I do like about it is that they seem to have thought about trying to take care of any rigging that might go on based on having that short window when most people are playing. It may be a server population issue as well. And it may be, you know what, it's beta, so we're just going to do it for a short time. So that remains to be seen whether they expand this to 24/7 or whatever the case may be. But for the moment, that actually precludes me. And from what I understand by reading a lot of the forums and comments and such, quite a few other people simply don't have the time to do it. Let's touch on the rewards before we talk a little bit more about the time and the nature of ranked battles, about what it is in general vis-a-vis endgame content. The rewards thing is still an issue for me. You are giving equipment that is superior to the very best players. They're not going to get a lot of the equipment because it does take quite a few bonds to do this, and it's very grindy, which is something we'll talk about in just a moment. But still, I think the concept of giving the better equipment is a bad idea. It's just a bad idea. It doesn't matter that somebody can't get 10, 20, 30, 50 pieces of equipment. The fact is it exists and you're allowing the better players to have it. So on their E50M or some already fairly OP or top performing, let's not talk OP, let's just say some other top performing tank, they're going to add just that little bit of extra edge that when you give it to a very good player, a little bit of extra edge is actually a lot more because they can leverage that little bit of extra edge much further. All right, it's like giving Tom Brady all the best receivers in the league, that kind of idea. While it doesn't guarantee a win, it certainly adds to his capability / the Unicum's capability, who now has even a few tenths of a second better reload. Okay, so again, we can't get too crazy. It's not going to turn the game upside down, but it's just a silly addition that they don't need to do. As another side note, there was a note on Rita's blog talked about there was a ranked battles exploit. They found it on RU. I'm not going to explain what it is, but it was interesting. The response from Wargaming was, hey, look, if you do this, there will be repercussions. It was pretty immediate, so I actually like that, and it may already been fixed in this last micro patch, but that went little reported, and I thought that was actually a pretty good thing. I'll link all these things on Rita's report that I'm talking about down in the comments. All right, so let's get to the end of the ranked battles thing. The thing about it that I really don't like very much, and it does apply to the end game content thing. Obviously, the equipment deal is an issue for me, but what I don't like too much about it is the grindy nature of this season. All right, so there's 4 sections of the season, and you've really got to get in there and grind. Now, if you're very good, you can blitz your way to rank 5 and probably sit there. But there are some other opportunities to bring separate and individual tanks up different ranks. And to be honest, I'm not sure how this is all going to play out, but it looks like you've got to sit down at 7 or 8, whatever it is, PM, based on your time zone, and sit there and grind away. And if you get a bunch of wins in a row, good on you, but if you're a 60% player, you're not going to get a bunch of wins in a row. So eventually you're able to get up there a few ranks. and it's just a grind. You're just grinding. And I don't think when you're talking endgame content that grinding is the way to go. The grind was all the way in the back as you ground your way up to the tier 10. Making some kind of ranked system that's very grindy like this to get bonds and such, I don't know. That just seems odd to me, and my question then becomes, why exactly is another grind on top of the grind considered endgame content? Simply because it's a tier 10 tank? Is that the whole reason? Obviously the skill thing is coming in, definitely coming in, and we'll talk about that when we get on to the next section here after a while, because really when you're talking endgame content, you probably need to drop the grind and accentuate the skill a little bit. Drop the grind and accentuate the skill. And I don't think that tier 10 automatically means, a little foreshadowing here, I don't think that tier 10 automatically means endgame content. So let's have another drink of coffee and we'll move on. Okay, so endgame. Wargaming's current attempt is ranked battles. They are discussing endgame quite a bit in a lot of interviews, and we'll talk about that in just a moment with old Milos. But for endgame, let's just talk a little bit in general about that. My question then becomes with this whole ranked battles is endgame content. I'm thinking, do we really need contrived endgame? Does there need to be an actual separate part of the game that's considered endgame? Why isn't endgame more closely tied to skill and not a separate type of mode? Not a separate type of mode. That's the question. We'll get to the answer in just a minute. What about just incremental awesome, both in the design of your game and as people improve in skill and play the game? What about that? Why not concentrate on fixing a lot of the issues with your game? And none of them are massive, especially at this point. They've done a pretty decent job of moving in the right direction, minus all the controversy lately with OP tanks and such. But overall, an overarching idea, what about just incremental awesome? What about just improving the great game and the mechanics incrementally so that endgame becomes more about the game getting better and the players getting better? Why can't tier 6 be endgame? Not in that the game only goes to tier 6, but why can't a guy playing tier 6 be in some kind of end game situation where he's getting better and better, the game's getting better and better, and he's the best tier 6 tank, whatever tank it is, driver? And there's a way for him to prove that, within the game itself. Why can't that be endgame? We'll talk about that a little bit later. Why waste time and effort, especially development-wise, on ranked battles, which is basically a kind of separate game within the game, when you could work on incremental awesome and make your end game content more about how well you play the game itself, as opposed to making a whole new mode? All this attempt to create new modes and thinking that endgame requires a new mode is driving me a little bit batty, because it's doing two things. Number one, they're failing, which is not good, and number two, it's taking time and resources away from the rest of the game. So why are we wasting time on that? You know, Wargaming, your strength, your absolute strength is the pub match and how well this game works overall. And some of the best endgame you used to have was a fairly robust clan wars system, which I'm not going to get into that, but that was there as well. That was something you could have continued to work on. Alright, so there's a little quick discussion on endgame. Now let's go ahead and talk about the interview with Milos, because it does apply to everything I was just talking about. And have another cup of coffee. I'll be with you. Alright, here's the interview with Milos, at least as far as it is translated on Rita's blog. Some interesting questions and answers here, and some of them apply to what we've been discussing. First of all, it looks like he's been playing the game. They ask him how many battles he has. He says 14,000 victories, which was the odd number to throw out there, saying he's between 50 and 51% win rate. What we won't do here is get too crazy about the translation. Sometimes the syntax and the words used in translations aren't exactly conveying exactly what the person meant, but we're going to try to suss out the major ideas within it. So then we ask, what will the next big thing be added to what? And we get into a long discussion about endgame. What he says we lack at the moment is Endgame. Well, I don't know about that really, and we'll touch on that in a minute. Something for players who have already reached Tier 10. So apparently, it's up and out. It's an up and out kind of idea, kind of like the American military. If you don't gain a next rank, you're out. Up and out, buddy. You go to Tier 10, there must be Endgame after that. Why can't Tier 6 be Endgame? Again, we'll talk about that later. So he says his director, Thane Lyman, says that Tier 10 tanks are like Ferraris in the garage. You probably won't want to purchase something like that because your lower tier does better for you. Ranked battles will hopefully make you want to leave that garage. Well, to some extent I agree with them because I personally don't like playing Tier 10 very much. I got a bunch in the garage. But it doesn't have anything to do with me thinking it's a Ferrari. It has a lot to do with me thinking it's not that fun. It's not that fun. All right. The new mode is for Tier 10, and the best players have come to this level. Well, have they? I guess, yes. In general, you could say that's true. But why does it have to be true, number one? And two, I don't think it's necessarily completely true. A lot of the best players will also be happy to play Tier 7, 8, 6 if the competition was right. If the competition was right. So he discusses how we're going to switch it into seasons, and then we're going to have 5 ranks, and you've got to advance, and who gets what when you are in the top 12 or the top 3 on the defeated team and such. Then he says the new mode will bring a new currency, bonds. What can you get with these? He discusses new equipment and directives. And this is my favorite sentence right here. Of course, we tried to keep some sort of balance with that. Of course, we tried to keep some sort of balance with that. Well, I don't. This is the part where I laugh. But I don't know what does that mean, some sort of balance. That's getting into the translation thing, but I can sort of understand what he's trying to convey here. He says, "Hey, we tried to balance the new equipment." Well, I mean, you can't balance the new equipment, dude. It's better. There's no balance. If you're telling me they're only going to have a couple and that balances it, well, maybe in the overall meta of the game it sort of balances it because you've only given the equipment out to a few people. But that doesn't help anyone who's facing that particular tank in a particular battle that has that extra 2% bonus, and he happens to already be a great player. All right, so that's not really something. I guess you could call that some sort of balance, but I would say it's some sort of crap balance. Are these able to be used outside of ranked battles? Excellent question, and the answer is unfortunately yes. All modes. Randoms, clan war, strongholds. Ugh, I won't even get into that. Are you planning on expanding ranked battles to lower tiers? Now that's actually a very good question, and it's also not a bad idea because it talks to what we're going to discuss later on about what really is endgame and what should be endgame in World of Tanks. But he says at the moment we're focusing on Tier 10. Never say never. We certainly talked about it, but it's definitely not something we're looking to introduce in the near future. Well, that's a horrible answer. I would have just left it at, yeah, we're looking into it. I know it's a beta and they've got to sort out how it works. That is all very valid. And I understand their idea that Tier 10 is supposed to be endgame. At least that's, as a developer, that's what they want it to be. And fellas, what you want and what happens are two different things. However, he's saying no, essentially, in the near future. So no, we're not going to see ranked battles. So darn you, World of Tanks players, endgame, by golly, is Tier 10, and it's Tier 10 ranked battles, and that's what I say. All right, so change to artillery. This is a bog. I'm not going to get into this. There was one interesting thing here that he said. Yeah, right here. Prior to that, playing artillery was very much more talk than play. I didn't translate very well, I don't think. Now with the accelerated loading, increased accuracy, and the splash area, it's more likely that you can influence a battle even with doing less direct damage. So, that's what we needed, right? We needed, see, I told you I wasn't going to bog down, but I just have to throw this out. That really, what the game needed, this is sarcasm, by the way, is a guy sitting on the red line influencing the battle more. That's what the game needed. No, that is not. Okay. Talks about average XP gained by players in SPGs. They say they're going to take a look at the new mechanics. This was interesting here because it blew my mind. There are differences, but part of this stems from the fact that players need to learn to play artillery again under the new mechanics. What? Really? Are you kidding me? Nothing changed with artillery. You play it exactly the same. exactly the same. The splash is larger, so you may be able to actually splash somebody behind a building further away, but that's not a change. It's just that the splash is larger. I don't get it. Okay. Matchmaking system, he goes into about the 13v13 battles. He says, hey, that was just a problem early on as we tried to work through things. Well, I'm still seeing those. That's a problem of low server count as well, and probably the RU doesn't see this very much. I would imagine NA sees it a lot more, and any of the other servers that have small populations. It's basically just a dump game where the matchmaker takes too long and it can't really make what it wants to, so it just makes a 13v13. That's just something we have to live with. I'm not that worried about it. It is interesting to me here, though, that he claims the best arrangement was 357 was, but I'm assuming means is, the 357 arrangement. I don't know about that. I don't know why they think 357 is the best arrangement. Where do they get that idea other than it just seems like a good idea? That's a whole matchmaker discussion. We'll stay away from that. Let's see. Let's go back to the same system. Random battles. Matchmaking doesn't take into account the skill of players. Okay, so these two are connected. This is the question. Let's go back to the same system. In random battles, the matchmaking doesn't take into account the skill of players. No, I definitely don't want to introduce such an option now. So he doesn't want an option to take into account the skill of players. Yet, Endgame is apparently skilled players playing tier 10. Did you catch that? It gets better. Will you see how ranked battles go to decide on the matter? This is not the end of skill-based matchmaking or of rank. Let's go back to the same system. Question, no, I definitely don't want to introduce such an option now, which is taking into account the skill of players. Hey, will you see how ranked battles go to decide the matter? This is not the end of skill-based matchmaking. Okay. Wow. Talk about trying to have your cake and eat it too. I mean, he is just really dancing around that whole subject right there. Crazy. All right. We'll talk about that a little bit later, actually, because it does apply to the conclusion that I'm going to come up with here in a minute. And then they ask about Polish tanks, which frankly I don't care about. More content's good. Polish or not, I don't really care. Okay. So probably got through a lot of coffee on that one. Let's move on to the conclusion and what I think endgame content should be. All right, so what's my take? Endgame content. What is it? Well, I think it needs to exist within your game already. You don't need another mode. You simply do not need another mode. What is actual endgame content and what? It's competition. Competition. Why does it have to be assumed tier 10 is endgame content? Why can't tier 8, tier 5, tier 3, tier 1 have endgame content? It can if you make competition out of it. Remember the top tanker event that they had a few months ago? That was fantastic. All the best players working as hard as they could to get in the top rank. Why top tanker is not a monthly part of this game, I will never know. They built the whole apparatus. It's there. The code's done. Adjusted a little bit. Every month it resets, and we find out who the best tanker is for each particular tank, and you can run it across the tiers. So if people want to specialize at tier 1, who cares? They're the best T1 Cunningham driver in the universe. That's in tier content. It's competition. Not skill-based matchmaking necessarily, but competition. If you expanded the ranked battles out to all the tiers, that would probably do it too. But now you've got two competing modes with two competing populations. And that's just not something that is sustainable on the North American server. And it's probably one of the reasons they're only concentrating on tier 10, especially in a North American server. And I would imagine even on the RU and the EU, it would essentially split the populations down the middle and have a bunch of people playing ranked battles all the time, and then the other people are playing the randoms. By having the limited amount of window to play ranked battles, they do help themselves out a little bit there, but that's prime time, and they're stripping a significant portion of their population away from the randoms during prime time playing. And I don't think that's particularly good for the overall health of the game either. So why not make the end game content live within what you've already got in the randoms, in the clan wars and everything else, and make it a competition so that you can prove your skill, and then you've got basically a top tanker event. What is Win 8 at the end of the day, especially for individual tanks? That's the EPing competition between the best tankers out there, and a third party developed it. That's why people chase Win 8. It's why they like to see purple numbers. It's because it's competition and they want to prove that they're the best at that tank. Now, I understand there's lots of arguments about padding and other things, but if Wargaming runs it and it's on basically their experience or average experiences, which is what they did for Top Tanker, that's about as good as it gets for a measuring stick on how good somebody is at a tank within World of Tanks play. So why is, the question then of course, why is end tier, tier 10 considered only the only end game competition or the only end game content? Why is tier 10 ranked battles quote unquote end game? Why can't the rest of the game have end game content in the form of competition? That's what you need to do. And then you can shit can all of the extra modes you're trying to add and concentrate your development effort on randoms, clan wars, and what you've got. That's Guido's take on what they should do and what real endgame content should be within World of Tanks, because World of Tanks is basically a grindy game. And even as you're playing your tier 10s, you're grinding your crews and making them better. And that's one of the fantastic things about it. It's that incremental improvement, which is what hooks gamers and keeps them coming back. That is what you should be doing with your endgame content. All right, well, I hope you like the coffee talk. Make sure you like, favorite, follow, subscribe, whatever flavor it is, wherever you see this thing. Have some coffee. Enjoy your weekend, and we will see you.